IT Pro TV, an easy, entertaining approach to online IT training. Stream over 2,000 hours of up-to-date, high-quality video content live and on demand. For a free 7-day trial and for a limited time, get 50% off a monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. Visit itpro.tv/enterprise security and use the code ES50. LogRhythm's Netmon Freemium delivers real-time network visibility to quickly identify emerging threats in your IT environment. Netmon Freemium is a free commercial-grade network forensics and traffic analytics solution. You can use Netmon Freemium's powerful capabilities to search against all observed network traffic, identify abnormal traffic patterns and application usage, and quickly analyze full packet captures. Take the first step towards real-time network visibility. Visit logRhythm.com/freemium to learn more and download it today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Just a quick announcement, itpro.tv's courses now include Sierra Update. No, they now include ITIL Managing the Lifecycle and Microsoft Hello for Business. Sorry about that. The teleprompter the teleprompter now has artificial intelligence, Doug, and updates itself. It's awesome. Premium annual memberships include all video content as well as access to virtual labs and Q&A forums. You'd normally pay $85.70 a month or $857 per year, but we have a special offer from our listeners. For a limited time only, get 50% off a monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. Go to itpro.tv/enterprise security and use the discount code ES50 for 50% off, which is fantastic. So, how do you handle public breach disclosure? Doug, I want to somewhat limit this, at least in the beginning, to you work for an organization that provides a service to the general public, right? So not so much a software vendor necessarily that researchers are finding bugs in, but you work for an insurance company or a university, and you've suffered some kind of breach, and you have to then notify publicly your subscribers. And I think what's the first point that I want to get your take on is what we were talking about before with DLP. When I read these public breach disclosures, so when the university that I go to says, hey, we suffered a breach, and your personal information may or may not have been at risk, right? It runs the gamut. They're either like, we think the attacker stole this, or a lot of times they say, hey, we had a breach, but no information was disclosed. Now, when we work with these organizations, Doug, and we ask them, hey, do you know where your sensitive data lives? Do you know who has access to it? Do you know which systems it lives on? And do you know where it's transmitted to and from? And they're usually like on all 4 points, like, no. And
yeah,
so, but
exactly.
wait, when you did public disclosure, you said with certainty the attackers didn't get access to your data. And I'm like, hold on, there's a disconnect here.
Well, I'll tell you where one of the disconnects is, and there's a whole bunch of them. And some of it is what there was, what there is, and what there will be. But one of the disconnects is there's not a lot of protection for both the organization, the IT personnel, and corporate legal in all these different affairs. And in the past, so what there was a world where most people in the legal side, most people in the judiciary, they don't even know what this stuff means. I used to get asked questions all the time from judges or lawyers and people from the United States Congress about what exactly does something mean. Like when you say exploit, what exactly does that mean? So one of the problems was that in the past, there was zero incentive for enterprises to disclose any kind of culpability. Because if you disclose it, guess what? You put out a press release today and you say, we did something wrong, and some bad things happen. you're going to have the phone start ringing by a lot of attorneys filing class action lawsuits before you go home today, because they're going to say, wow, this is a giant corporation. They have a lot of money. I'm going to file a class action lawsuit. I don't even know what it means, but we're going to file one anyway to get up in front of everybody else. What there is right now is there's sort of a tipping point between the law, which is still unclear on all this. I mean, there's no in the United States anyway, there's no real clear laws about what your actual liability is. I mean, there's some stuff, but it's not real clear. And ethics, which is, do you owe this to your customers?
Mm-hmm.
And then basically getting caught. So getting caught means that when all your customers find out that your university has disclosed everything, you have a big problem. IT still has no real upside to going to management and saying, we messed up, because that's the way it's going to come off. Even if you went to management 500 times and said, we need DLP and we need better firewalls and we need more personnel and all these things that they asked for, and management went, those things are far too expensive for us to do at this time. That small port could never be hit with a torpedo the size of a womp rat. So what ends up happening is that we don't do anything about it until something bad does indeed occur. But at this point in time, where we are is that because they see other companies getting bombed by these kind of things, and when that is disclosed, they suffer for it, that ethics tipping point has sort of started to come into play. And now management's going, we're not vulnerable on this, are we, Ted? Well, you wouldn't give us that money we needed. So then they give you the money, and you still get bombed, and then you have another problem. What will be probably is more legislation out in the future that directly puts some kind of punitive structure in place for dealing with this. So it gets out of the civil side and it gets into the sort of civil criminal side, where you say, California tried something like this. I think they have a law that you're penalized so many cents for every record that's disclosed or something like that.
Oh,
certainly HIPAA, SOX, and things like that have essentially a punitive financial impact on enterprise when they lose their ability to trade publicly or whatever happens to you if you get SOX violations. But that stuff's not really here yet. So at this point in time, it's really just about this sort of public exposure. IT doesn't want to talk about it because it makes them get fired. Legal doesn't want to talk about it because it causes them to get sued, and upper management doesn't want to talk about it because it costs them money. So right now, I think it's a very tricky business, a big quagmire. Maybe out in the future somewhere there's more things in place to try and control it, but that's a tough game. And then you also get the pro-business argument, which says putting all these punitive measures in place is going to punish companies. They're going to downsize. They're going to move offshore. And it does turn into a bit of a tricky situation because of that. Well, I heard people when SOX first went into play, and that's Sarbanes-Oxley, if you don't know what I'm talking about. But Sarbanes-Oxley went into place. There were companies, and I know several I could name, who literally took their business elsewhere. And they packed up and they said, then we just won't be traded on the public exchanges in the United States. We're going to move to the French exchange and forget it. So if you go too fast and you slap huge punitive damages on some of these, it's going to be a problem as well. So it's a very tricky business for legislators. It's a very tricky business in the court system. So...
Well, and there still are on the books today public breach disclosure laws, right? Like I think Massachusetts was one of the first states to implement a law that says if you're breached, you have to tell your customers.
Exactly.
And that's even before any punitive damages occur.
Right. And so just forcing them to disclose is a move forward, because that gets the customers agitated. They make calls, they call attorneys, and that does start pushing that ethics tipping point into the direction where it should be, which is they should have to disclose because you have been harmed by this. And I know a lot of states have laws like that on the books now to try to force them to do it. The tricky part is detecting it and even knowing that it happened. I mean, I can imagine, somewhere in the deep, dark recesses of corporate legal, them going, do we need to tell them about this, or should we just keep it to ourselves? What exactly constitutes a breach?
Yes.
We lost some records, but is that a breach? I don't know. Maybe not. Because if nobody knows about it and the Washington Post doesn't have the story already, I know the temptation inside the company legal structure is going to be to not talk. because that's always going to be the temptation.
Oh, that's the first inclination, for sure.
And I mean, you go back through history and look at that, whether it was with opium or it was with poison gas or whatever it was, the company did not want to talk about it until it became evident they had to. And that's kind of where we are, I think, with a lot of this data breach stuff right now. It's not clear what the punitive damages are and what the fine. I haven't read that Massachusetts law, so I don't know what the fine is, if you violated it. When you start talking about, well, we'll fine you $500,000, and IBM or somebody says, yeah, okay, wow, we'll
that's
just pay
fine. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, customers should be aware of the breach, and I think in a lot of breaches we've seen, what I hope for in the context of this conversation is that it's not a huge deal for either the consumer or the company, right? If like Target breach or whatever breach you want to pick on, if my credit card was stolen and they can identify whose credit card was stolen, they can offer some services to help you recover from that. The big question is who pays for that? Is the credit card companies? Is it Target? Is the consumer? Is it shared across all three? But hopefully it's not a big deal for everyone involved to get issued a new credit card and go on about your way. We hope.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. And I do think credit card companies are a good example. They have learned over the course of history and all the problems they've had with fraud and with theft and everything else. They have a pretty good mechanism in place now with artificial intelligence on their security systems to detect patterns. I know that when I want to travel somewhere unusual that I haven't traveled, which is harder and harder to find, I have to call the credit card company and say, I'm going to be in Ho Chi Minh City tomorrow. So I just want to let you know that. And in the process of getting to Ho Chi Minh City, I'm going to be in Newark, New Jersey, Hong Kong, China. And, so my card doesn't get shut down. But they have learned about that. I think breaches may, evolve into that level, but I don't know. Breaches are always going to be a tricky business because you said that when you first led into this, sometimes we aren't even sure a breach has happened.
Yeah.
So there gets to be this trigger of, well, if no one was harmed, if a breach falls in the forest, does anybody hear it? And so maybe
the bad things happen if you don't disclose, because we can use Yahoo as an example of that.
Absolutely.
I think it's a question of the longer you haven't disclosed and then all of a sudden it comes to light. Everyone's like, well, what were you hiding about that breach? And then in the Yahoo example, they uncovered multiple breaches, and then that was just really bad news for Yahoo.
You're absolutely right. And that kind of punitive action, which is not legal in nature, but is just cultural in nature, is the most powerful thing of all. Because when you see a bank who has ATM skimmers set up on every ATM they've got in 3 states, and they don't do anything about it, their customers are going to migrate somewhere else. And so that's that pure capitalism kind of model of it, where it's just like, okay, the customers choose the best and most secure source. But yeah, if you let these breaches lay there and you lost 1 million data records 5 years ago, those data records are probably being sold on the dark web, even if you haven't seen anything come to light from it. But that was where we were, because a lot of companies are going, well, if we don't see any direct proof that it was ours, it didn't happen. And there was a big disconnect between IT, because IT was not going to legal and saying, we think a breach occurred, because then somebody's getting fired. So they're just keeping that to themselves, because the oldest IT model of all is the we will fix it model. That's the old engineering model from the 1930s and 40s, and it became the computer science model of the 50s and 60s, was nobody knows what we're doing. We'll just take care of it. All you lawyers just go about shuffling your papers, and we'll be down here fixing the code. And as that evolved, there's still a mentality of, I don't want to be the whistleblower who calls upstairs and says, we have a problem, because you're going to be the target. And legal's going to be down there in an hour, and it gets really, really frightening from there. Same thing went with law enforcement. We saw that as we started setting up the cyber disruption team in Rhode Island. We were trying to build a bridge between law enforcement and corporate so that they knew each other, because there was a huge built-in ideology in IT and computer science that I don't want to call 911. I'm going to fix it. And even when I can't fix it, I'm going to try anyway, because I don't want the police to come busting in here and take all our stuff. And we were trying to build that bridge so that somebody could call the captain at computer crimes and say, what do you think about this? And get some really good feedback before it escalated. And that helped as well. So it's evolving.
And what's interesting too is there's, a lot of companies today that will search the dark web for your data And a lot of companies are signing on for that, I think, for a lot of different reasons. One of those reasons is they're like, well, we want to know, we, the company, want to know if we've lost our customer data, and we'll pay a company to monitor the dark web so that we know about it before it goes public, so we can start doing damage control internally, so that when we do go public, we're in much better shape, rather than, oh, we didn't know, it was on the dark web, and now all of a sudden it's public, and they're like, oh my God, we have no idea what happened. We have no idea how we lost that data. We look bad because either we're saying we don't know or we're not saying anything, whereas if you can get ahead of it, then you have some information. So when it does go public, you can say, yes, this is what we think happened.
I met with two different companies that were doing just that. I like the idea. One of them was 6GIL, which is it's Israeli intelligence agents, and the other one I can't remember. They're going to be mad at me too because I can't remember the name of the company. But they were all using, like, not IT people, but they were using intelligence agents to go out on the dark web and look for ways they could collect information using intelligence techniques rather than technology techniques. And I thought this was a very innovative approach, because it means they're looking for your information, for your company name, and they were building profiles then of what does your company look like on the dark web, how much traffic, how much chatter, how much interest in. And they were just using the same techniques that nation states use to look at, are there threats out there on the horizon? And I think enterprise-wise, this is a really realistic solution to this kind of problem. If they build a profile and have it over the long haul, that comes back into your SOC. And so now you've got a threat profile from the dark web. You can maybe see these breaches start to develop. And then before anything too dramatic happens, maybe that's when IT can sit down with legal and management and say, we're seeing threat profiles really start to evolve on the dark web related to our company. And you can sort of jump on that up front and say, we may have had a breach, or we may be going to have a breach very, very soon. And I like that idea, because proactive security is always the best kind of security.
Absolutely. Doug White, thank you very much for helping me out with this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. It's been a lot of fun. We'll see everyone next time.